We're going to head across the pond now to hear about opportunities for partnering with Europe to accelerate US biomanufacturing. And to take you through this panel, delighted to welcome Samuele Ambrosetti, who is Programming and Innovation Manager at the Bio-Based Industries Consortium. Samuele.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Leo. Yes. Indeed, we are the last session before the lunch break, and we try to make it interesting for all of you so that you don't leave for lunch break before we are over. No, thank you for being here, by the way, and thanks a lot to Leo and Paul for inviting us and having this session. So the theme of this workshop, partnering with Europe to accelerate US biomanufacturing. We'll discuss about that in a minute with our great panelists, but before we do that, I'll give you a very short introduction just to set the scene and explain basically why we're here and who we are. Basically, the Bio-Based Industries Consortium, we are an organization based in Brussels. We have over 350 companies in our membership and around 300 research organizations and universities covering, as you can see, practically all the steps of the bio-based value chains in terms of biomass provision from agriculture, from forestry, from algae, fungi, whatever kind of biomass you can imagine. Its conversion and use all the way down to the market actors. And in terms of membership, we have some of the biggest names, the ADM, the Cargill, the Evonik, Novonesis, Braskem, Adidas, Michelin, BASF, L'Oreal, P&G, Unilever. Okay, I could go on. But what I like to point out is 80% of our membership is made by SMEs and startups. And I think this mix of large market actors and smaller technology developers is really a key asset for us to be on top of all the technology trends. So what we have observed, this is a bit what our mission is, taking the bio-based product and processes all the way from ideation to the market. And what we have seen is that the bio-based industries experience actually two valleys of death most of the time, between lab and demo scale, and then from demo scale to production. And what we have observed is each stage of this development involves, of course, different challenges, and there are different tools and measures that you need to put in place to develop, the bio-based value chains. What does it mean in practice? For us, it means working across these three dimensions: access to finance, innovation and scale-up, and policy support. So the access to finance pillar is all about de-risking investments in bio-based operations and making sure that we create the conditions for the capital to flow into biorefinery projects. In our case, the way we work is we promote the interaction between our members and investors that can support, of course, their projects. In the innovation and scale-up, this requires finding the right partners, right? It's very difficult to develop something on your own. So we have this network, as I said, of over 350 companies and 300 universities that we can mobilize to partner up together. But most, maybe also importantly, we can leverage that network to develop strategic research and innovation agendas that then can be implemented by European institutions. By the way, the focus of our activities are in Europe, but as you can see, we have a global membership. It doesn't mean that we are restricted to Europe, and this is the reason basically why we are here. The policy support pillar is pretty self-explanatory, of course. We need to have a favorable regulatory framework, but we also need this regulatory framework to be stable and predictable so that we can mobilize long-term investments in bio-based industries. And I think in this respect, Europe can offer some advantages. We may be a bit slower, perhaps, in making decisions, but once a decision is made, we usually stick with it. Of course, not everything is perfect. I'm well aware that in terms of over-regulation, in terms of long permitting time and application procedures for approval procedures for the new materials and products, we have maybe something to learn from the US. This is also part of the experience, and we will discuss, I guess, this later with the panel. By the way, there are quite a few important policy measures that are coming up in the European space in the next few months. We have new bioeconomy strategy coming up. By the end of this year, we have the Clean Industry Act, the Circular Economy Act, the Life Sciences Act. So more to follow, and I hope I'll be back next year to tell you more about that. There was supposed to be an animation here. Well, what I wanted to say is that at the center, at the intersection of finance, innovation and scale-up, and policy support is where the sweet spot is for us, which is the European funding for innovation and scale-up projects. So in the budget of the European Union, we have quite a few opportunities for bio-based industries. They can be found under the European Regional Development Fund, under the Rural Development Fund, and crucially for us, under the Horizon Europe Framework Program for Research and Innovation. Under Horizon Europe, there are a number of public-private partnerships, and the one that is dedicated to the bio-based industries and bioeconomy is the Circular Bio-based Europe joint undertaking. And it's particularly important for us because this is the reason why basically we were born 12 years ago, to be the the representative of the private sector in this PPP. So, yeah, there used to be another slide that I could have shown you, but it doesn't matter, I can speak about it. So the CBE works, it has a bit of similarity with Biomate that you're all familiar with. It also has a few differences. It has a total budget of €1 billion of public funding, so roughly $1.2 billion for the 7 years between 2021 and 2027. Of course, we are working on having a prolongation for 2028, 2034. Finger crossed, we will get it. But then it is based on open calls for proposals. The funding available per project varies between €3 million for lab scale research up to €20 million, so around $23 million for large scale, first of its kind biorefinery at TRL 8, so pre-commercial but already industrial scale facilities. And we have quite a good, let's say, track record of success. We now have over 20 of these first-of-a-kind biorefineries across Europe that have been funded by this initiative. I'd like to point out, you don't have to be one of our members up front in order to participate. You can submit the proposal, and then in case you get the project, we will ask you to become a member. So this is important to keep the opportunities open. And also, you don't have to be a European company in order to join. You can also be US-based as long as you open a legal entity in Europe and you plan to perform the project activities in Europe. So I think that's a pretty good opportunity, and I hope I was able to give a bit of an introduction. So now we can move on with our panel. So yeah. So welcome to our panelists. Thank you a lot for being here. We have Max Weisz, Strategy and Business Development from Cargill BioIndustrial. So Max, as the leader of strategy and business development at Cargill BioIndustrial, is focused on strategic growth in bio-based products for Cargill's portfolio. This includes both large opportunities, such as the core joint venture, but also smaller specialty opportunities. Welcome, Max. Thank you for being here. Jessica Monserrate, Head of Sustainability in North America for BASF. Jessica is a scientist by training, and she's been working for the past 10 years managing research projects. Now, as a head of sustainability, she's responsible for BASF North America's 10-year strategy for sustainability in agricultural solutions. Welcome, Jessica. And we have Nico Snoeck, head business development manager for the BioBased Europe pilot plant. Nico has a PhD in biotechnology from the Ghent University, and in his capacity of business development manager for BioBased Europe pilot plant, he's responsible for the sale and management of new projects in industrial biotechnology. So, welcome to our panelists. Thanks a lot for being here. I'd like to start by asking each of you about your own experiences in innovation and scale-up projects in Europe, in the US, maybe starting from Max. So Max, Cargill has a few examples of co-located integrated biorefineries. One is pretty near to us in Blair, Nebraska. Another one that I know quite well because it was also receiving support from the CBE is the one you have in the Netherlands in Saas-van-Gent. So can you tell us a bit more about these integrated value chain projects and what are the enabling factors that make them possible?
Yeah, happy to. Hope everybody can hear me. I think I'll try not to repeat what Nate said earlier in yesterday's session. But I think we spend a lot of time looking at technology readiness over a number of different startups and a number of different potential partners. I think the differences between the US and the European markets is around size. I think we spend a lot of time there. And size, while the size might be dictated by your ambitions, it's oftentimes dictated by demand and what actually ends up happening in those meetings. And so if you have to jump over the pond to make something work from a market demand standpoint, I think we're seeing that a little bit more now than we saw before. I think in the United States, it's go big or go home. I think in Europe, I think you see a little bit more patience with market development, especially with novel bio-based products. And then I think the third one, the one that you mentioned, the project that you mentioned, I think that's kind of the holy grail when it comes to partnerships. So I think we had a venture investment, we had a commercial agreement, we also had a co-location, and we had some go-to-market things built into all that. So I think that's a bit of a holy grail. If you can pull off maybe one or two of those, I think that will be a success. But really, it's making sure that you're ready to actually scale up the technology itself. So kind of on the tail end of that second valley of death is where a lot of our co-location opportunities actually materialize. So.
Yeah. And how do you see perhaps an interplay or a, let's say, relation between such projects in Europe and the US, opportunities for replication between the two?
I think there's opportunities for replication, but I think more importantly, there's opportunities to kind of hop across the pond depending on where you are in your process. And don't just be focused on the US or the EU, really focus on where the demand is for your product and where the emerging demand is, if it's a novel technology or if it's a bio-based technology like core, where you might need more volumes on the supply chain side. I don't be afraid to hop from one side to the other, because we've seen success from certain bio-based products in Europe that might not necessarily have been sized appropriately for the United States, and vice versa. And so I think it's important to kind of keep your options open on that front.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
And I would like to continue with Jessica, right from where Max has finished. So about hopping between the two sides of the Atlantic. I know that BASF is investing in innovation and scale-up on both sides of the Atlantic. How does it work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't disagree with anything Max said. I think he eloquently stated the benefits and how you really handle the two different locations and what opportunities you have. So in our example, we have a pilot going on. And that pilot is really to become, really help us diversify how we develop our starting materials with regard to fatty alcohols. So there is a partnership we have with Acetis and Acetis Bio, and they have a unique fermentation process that helps us work with methanol, a bio-based source of methanol, and convert that into fatty alcohols. And that's really the important precursors and building blocks for our different surfactants that we're very well known for. So, it just made sense, a nice constellation of activities kind of aggregated in this location. But when we think about how to leverage the US versus EU, of course, it comes down to scaling up in the US, having access to many more ag materials, feedstocks, et cetera, and diversify. But using the same IP and fermentation process and replicating it here is how we would see both benefits.
Thank you. And I'm a bit familiar with the project you were mentioning that's happening in Europe, or yeah. So do you see a direct, perhaps, way in which you can transfer that IP to the US and scale up or replicate, or is it still a bit down the road?
I think it's still a bit down the road. It's tough to kind of predict the different kind of standards, policies, all that good stuff. So there's a lot to really kind of think through and premeditate. But yeah, I think what's unique about the different locations and being a multinational company is you're taking the best of all of the local opportunities that occur, and then just seeing how do we harmonize across and keep moving. But yeah, we're a bit too far right now.
Yeah. So now I would like to shift to Nico to give a bit the opposite perspective. We've heard from two companies that are sort of selecting the location of their projects based on the ideal conditions on both sides. You are a pilot plant. You're located in Europe. I know that you have several companies, startups from the US coming to you for their scale-up. So why do you think what do you think makes it attractive for them to come to Europe for scale-up?
Yeah, well, one of the points in the end, I think that Europe has actually quite big history in piloting in biotechnologies. We used to have a lot of antibiotic production plants in Europe, amino acid production plants that were been there since after the Second World War, since the 60s in Europe. And unfortunately, all of that production went away to China. So there were a lot of idle production plants that were also turned into pilot and demonstration facilities. And there has been, just historically quite a lot of production opportunity, piloting networks existing in Europe, and I would say not so much in the United States, where, of course, that was very attractive to US startups. And secondly, you should also not forget that, the European market, it is a huge market. We have 500 million of inhabitants. That's more than the United States. Of course, the market that we have, it's not as unified as it is in the States, but it gives a great opportunity for the US startups to collaborate with European pilot infrastructure, because of course also we have our European network and can really leverage that network and help the US companies in setting off their products in the European Union. And then, and because of also that history in the end, it's in production in biotechnology, you also have all of that knowledge, because in the end, piloting and scaling, it's about know-how, it's about knowledge, and that's very well available in Europe, I would say.
Can you share maybe a success story without giving out confidential details?
Success story. Well, there are quite some success stories I can mention. You already mentioned, I think, one of them with the co-location plant with Cargill, which is with the company Enough. Enough was a small. Well, actually, it was a British company, so it's maybe not the right example, but that's an interesting example of how we can collaborate in the international. For US startups, I have to think what I can tell and what I cannot tell. But we actually have plenty of US startups that we helped in scaling really from lab to demonstration scale, where they did production both in the United States and in Europe. So there are quite some companies that we helped,
Thank you. Now, for the second question to all of you, it will be the same question to all of you. And it's more, let's say, related to the global scene. So what kind of threats and opportunity do you see in the global bioeconomy landscape? Is there any way that Europe and the US can act together, maybe learn from each other, maybe do something together? We start again with Max.
I think I'll have to address I think it's like the third or fourth elephant in this room. China, I think, is to Nico's point, it has their own bioeconomy strategy. I think they're going to come out with their next 5-year plan in a couple of months. I think it'll be important to watch what they prioritize there and what they do there, because there's a long history of many different products, citric, lysine, now biofuels, that have been under competitive pressures. So that just means you have to have a significant amount of differentiation when you go to market if you're going to last for a long time. But I think the opportunities around synthetic biology are still incredibly underutilized, and maybe to an extent, some of these patent portfolios that bigger companies like us, I admit, may be open to licensing and collaboration a bit more. Now that they've sat on them for longer periods of time, maybe there are opportunities to work across the various companies and maybe license some old technology that is actually beneficial now, or work through that, because I think we do a lot of work that doesn't get announced from the big companies, and oftentimes you don't even know what's underneath our portfolio until you start having those discussions. And I think a bit more of those kinds of discussions with smaller players who are willing to take the risk to do the development work might actually prove to be beneficial to both parties.
So risk sharing as a way of de-risking?
Yeah, exactly, in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So same question to you, Jessica?
I think from my perspective, it's a little bit more of the regulation hurdles that are kind of tough to kind of navigate. They add a good amount of time sometimes, and so some of these projects, they're already risky to begin with, they're lengthy, and if we're kind of having to get clarity on a piece of, permit or things like that, those things really kind of start adding to that bottom line bill. And so that's a bit of the consternation that we have sometimes is it just sometimes cheaper to navigate elsewhere? So I think that's maybe a little bit of what I would call the elephant in the room as well, is just the amount of regulations that are required and necessary in order to execute some of these things in Europe.
Yeah. And talking about elephants in the room and regulations, I think another one is, okay, of course, the competition with fossil and the fact that sometimes, especially in Europe, I don't know what's the situation here in the US, but you can tell me because it's about sustainability criteria, especially for biomass, especially for primary biomass, especially for possibly food crops, which is sometimes something that we have really to face. And sometimes I have the impression that bio-based is under much more scrutiny than fossil for whatever reason.
Yeah. So that's a really important question too, and we're having to navigate that because we don't know really, is this like kind of a policy strategy that we need to work through? Do we need to kind of change perception? A lot of it is food, feed, fuel. A lot of that really doesn't necessarily feel to be an issue in North America, but understandably maybe in other parts of the world it may be. But I think the concerns over that is just really could be re-examined and led with a little bit more scientific guidance, yeah. Not so much an emotional conversation. Yeah.
Indeed, 100% agree. Same question to you, Nico.
I echo what Jessica was saying, but there's maybe a little bit more nuance to the regulation part. Because of course, indeed, in Europe it is slow. I mean, I'm not denying that it's notoriously slow. On the other hand, I think the regulation in Europe, Europe has been and is still a front runner in all of these, let's say, green regulations and making sure you have safe chemicals, that you have reduction in or CO2 abatement that you have. And I mean, in the end, if for example, relating to food, if EFSA makes a decision, there's no one in Europe that will question it. And I'm not entirely sure how that is in the United States or what the effect is of, for example, FDA approval here. Has that the same effect on customers than in Europe? So I think there's a little bit more nuance maybe to the story, but for sure, I think it should be faster in Europe, but it should not come with the downside of losing faith in the organization. And maybe a second thing that what we can learn from each other is also on funding. If I talk to people here, they were all talking about funding. We need much more funding, and for sure in Europe we don't have the VC capital market like we have in the US. But I think from the European Commission out, like with CBEGU, there is funding opportunities for demonstration production sites in Europe. You have that possibility, that availability of that funding money. It's a huge program. It's billions of euro. And maybe with the current administration here in the US, that's not so much the case. So I think there's for sure some opportunities at both sides of the ocean.
Yeah, and just one more thing. I think we're all experiencing a lot of whiplash and pendulum swings, and I think it's maybe a nice time to sort of live in the synthesis, meaning how do we kind of balance these pendulum swings and just understand that there is a goal and we need to stick to that goal with logic-based reasoning on either side of the pond, to be honest.
Good, great, okay. This leads us to the end. I have no more questions, but we still have 5 minutes. So we can close it here and go to lunch, or we can have some more spontaneous discussion if you want to end with one end message, 1 minute each.
Well, no, if there's any questions in the audience, happy to take them, but if not, I'm happy to also go to lunch.
Yeah, me too.
All right, great. Then I think we can close here. Thanks a lot. Please join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you all for being here today.